Let's dive right into one of the biggest questions out there, something philosophers have been wrestling with for ages. Is your free will a complete lie?
I mean, think about it. The choice you just made to watch this, the coffee you picked this morning, all of that felt like you were in the driver's seat, right? But what if that feeling, that sense of being in control, is just a trick your mind is playing on you? And here's where it gets really weird. What if that illusion isn't just some harmless mental quirk? What if it's actually the bedrock of our entire society, the thing holding up our sense of right and wrong, and even our own self-worth?
This brings us to a really fascinating and honestly pretty controversial idea in philosophy, one that suggests maybe, just maybe, we're all better off living with a beautiful, necessary lie.
So, this radical theory comes from a philosopher named Saul Smilansky, and his idea is that our belief in free will isn't just, wrong. He argues it's a critical deception that we should actually be trying to protect.
Okay, so what is this mind-bending idea called? Smilansky gives it a name, illusionism. Let's really break down what he means by that, because it's a lot to take in. Basically, illusionism makes two gigantic claims. Number one, genuine, from-the-ground-up free will probably doesn't exist. But, and this is the part that turns everything on its head, it also says it's morally right and super important for society to let almost everyone keep believing that it does. So you can boil it all down to this two-step idea. First, you have to accept the hard truth. Free will is an illusion. And second, we have to protect that very same illusion, keep it safe from being shattered for everybody else. It's this wild paradox. The truth is for a select few, while the illusion is for the rest of us. So naturally, this brings up a huge question. Why? Why on earth would a philosopher, someone whose whole job is seeking truth, argue that we should protect a lie? What's so dangerous about everybody knowing what's really going on? Well, Smilansky's reasoning is that we're basically caught between a rock and a hard place. He calls it a fundamental dualism. On one side, you've got our gut feeling that we have free will. On the other, you've got this idea of hard determinism, that everything that happens is inevitable, caused by what came before. Smilansky says if you fully accept either one, it leads to some pretty terrible consequences. And the stakes here? They couldn't be higher. Smilansky is convinced that if everyone just woke up tomorrow and accepted their choices aren't truly their own, it would be, in his own words, extremely damaging. It would just eat away at the foundations of our self-worth, our pride in our achievements, everything. And here you can really see the dilemma laid out. Believing the illusion, that's the basis for our whole moral universe, right? It lets us praise people, blame them, have a justice system, feel respect. But if you accept the so-called truth of determinism, all of that starts to look pretty shaky. I mean, if a criminal couldn't have chosen to act differently, does punishing them even make sense? For Smilansky, the answer is clear. The useful fiction is way better than the destructive truth. Now, as you can probably guess, not everyone's on board with this idea. It's pretty radical. So let's take a look at what the critics have to say, because there are some strong arguments against this whole protecting the lie thing. First up, we've got Professor Dirk Perboom, and he goes straight for the jugular. He questions the most basic part of Smilansky's argument, the idea that losing our belief in free will would automatically tank our sense of self-worth. Perboom's point is that our sense of who we are is way more complicated than that. He points out that so many of the things we value in ourselves and in other people have absolutely nothing to do with choice. Think about admiring someone's sharp intellect, or their natural talent for music, or their raw athletic ability. None of that is chosen, but it's still a source of pride and value. He argues that our self-worth is tough enough to handle the truth. All right, another interesting perspective comes from philosopher James Leneman. He kind of agrees that a world without free will would pose some challenges, but he thinks Smilansky is basically blowing the whole thing way out of proportion. See, for Leneman, this isn't some huge society-ending crisis. He sees these as practical issues that, we can solve. For instance, our justice system could just shift. It could focus less on punishment and more on rehabilitating people and just keeping society safe. It's an engineering problem, not a soul-crushing philosophical dead end. We can adapt. We don't need a lie to protect us. So where does all of this leave us? I mean, this debate is incredible, and it really seems to boil down to a conflict that's as old as time, a question that's about way more than just philosophy. In the end, it really all comes down to this. What do we value more? A hard, potentially uncomfortable truth about how the universe works, or a convenient, useful fiction that helps us live happier, more meaningful lives? Smilansky is firmly in the camp of the useful fiction. His critics, they think we're strong enough to handle the truth.
And that's really the question I want to leave you with. If a lie, a really big one about who we are and what it means to be human, is what gives us a sense of purpose and justice, is telling the truth the right thing to do? What do you think?